Super petrol, diesel and kerosene increases by 9 shilling and 90 cents.
Laikipia East constituency received 137.3 million shillings towards a number of developments.
MPs clinch this fund to campaign and they also misappropriate this fund.
Militi yangu kuvote na hata kama nitakosa itabidi niende Mungu ama nitafute miezi zingine.
Kichagua watu hata wanatusahau.
It is a fellowship of thieves.
In electoral procedures, nominations are basically a process of selecting a candidate for election to a public office. This, according to the Election Act, should happen if the candidate is a nominee of a political party. In the case of a member of parliament, they must hold a degree from a recognized university in Kenya. They should also be registered voters. However, this year the court temporarily suspended the law that bars aspirants without university degrees from seeking parliamentary seats. While these sound like things that fuel nominations and, more importantly, elections, there are hurdles. Since mid-April this year, Kenya has been reeling in what will rhetorically go down in history as a fuel crisis, with petrol retailing as high as 159 shillings and diesel at 140.
Period under review, the pump prices of super petrol, diesel and kerosene increases by 9 shilling and 90 cents per litre respectively.
This then, as was expected, sparked panic purchasing in anticipation of a fuel shortage. On one end, fuel stations were either closed or packed with motorists in long queues. And on the other, polling stations were getting ready for long queues ahead of the UDA party primaries. But in the midst of all this, Michael was conflicted on whether to abandon one for the other. Determined to cast his vote, Michael Gitonga was after a few liters of fuel for his boda.
Jina yangu ni Michael Gitonga Mushemi, ama wanapenda kuniita Baba Florence. Nafanya kazi ya boda na ndio unipatia riziki ya kila siku. Hapa ni Nanyuki Town, ni siku kubwa kwetu. Tuna uchaguzi ya UDA nomination na ndio sasa tunashughulika tupate mafuta ndio twende tukavote. Militi yangu kuvote na hata kama nitakosa itabidi niende Mungu ama nitafute miezi zingine. Hata kama ni baisikeli nitatafuta.
Now, as Michael sets off to find fuel for his boda, I am left wondering what he means in his own words, mabadiliko kwa mwananchi. In 2003, the CDF Act was established. Introduced to Parliament by former MP of Ol Kalou, Honorable Karue, this fund has gone through quite a number of developments. Devoted towards equity and the fight against poverty at the constituency level, 2.5% of all the government's ordinary revenue is allocated towards this fund. 75% of this allocation is then distributed equally amongst all the 290 constituencies in Kenya. 25% of this is allocated according to a constituency's poverty level. Years later, the CDF has morphed into what we now know as the National Government Constituencies Development Fund, the NG-CDF.
Okay, well, the National Government Constituency Development Fund started as a Constituency Development Fund in the early 2000s. It was a bill that was introduced by Engineer Karue, or the MP Ol Kalou then, who served later as a senator of Nyandarua. And when he introduced the bill during the first tenure of President Kibaki, a CDF, or Constituency Development Fund, was very noble then, because it was a way of having up, for lack of a better word, a bottom-up development approach, because at that particular moment as a country we didn't have devolution. So it was a way of devolving resources down there to the people.
One such beneficiary is Sweetwater's Day Secondary School in Laikipia East constituency. 4 blocks which now host almost 244 students cost the NG-CDF 6.375 million, according to a June 2020 Auditor General's report. In the financial year 2019-2020, Laikipia East constituency received 137.3 million shillings towards a number of developments. 72% of this funding education and other education-related programs. Members of Parliament, who are also patrons of this fund, are amongst the highest paid in the world, a seat that has become both lucrative and most sought after.
So MPs clinch this fund because, like I've said, to campaign, and they also misappropriate this fund. Because if you look at most of the Auditor General reports, you will find so many, the Auditor General has raised questions in so many constituency offices because the monies there have been misappropriated. And in this way, as much as the MP was removed as a direct implementer, he's now a patron.
In the case of Sweetwater's Day Secondary School, the 6.375 million could not be accounted for. The Auditor General in this report says there was unsatisfactory implementation of projects in the Laikipia East constituency. One being the construction of 4 classrooms in this school.
The Auditor General's report mentions existence of physical visible cracks on the walls, of course due to poor workmanship, and the contractor was not on site. When you look at CDF, in terms of the way they go about carrying out their projects, especially construction project, could be one of the main reasons why eventually we end up with poor quality work.
Every project funded by the NG-CDF goes through 6 steps before finally being handed over to Mwananchi. First is identification of these projects through ward meetings. Then the decision of prioritization of these projects is left to the constituencies committee. Once this is done, then the projects are approved by the NG-CDF board in Nairobi before funds are disbursed to the constituency's account. Once the funds are received by the respective constituencies, then implementation of these projects by the project management committee begins. Finally, before the project is handed over to the public, both the NG-CDFCs and the NG-CDF board monitor this project. But there is a missing bit. What happens when the project is officially handed over to the public? And what happens if the project is substandard, just like the Sweetwater Secondary School?
In some places it has benefited Mwananchi because when it changed to National Government Constituency Development Fund, a huge chunk of the fund was dedicated to promote education in the constituencies. But the problem here, on the flip side of it, is people do not take CDF as their right, as money that they should demand from, or money that they should demand to know how it's being used, or even demand the expenditure and everything. So people think or take this money as a token from their MP, and that's why the accountability of this fund is not as high as other funds.
Well, contractually, my understanding of CDF projects, not unless there's any evidence that some are done differently, is that once a contractor is awarded a project, they have to do some work. Okay? So the government doesn't pay, or CDF doesn't pay. You go to site, you carry out works, and then after a certain point, or you get to a certain milestone, an evaluation is done, where you ask for a payment to that point where you've reached, and then the CDF sends their team of the technical team to come and inspect and evaluate and ensure that the works, first of all, have reached the level that you've claimed they have, and secondly, that they have been done to the quality and specification as was agreed in the bill of quantities. Of course, this is poor quality workmanship. As I'm looking at the wood that has been used for the trusses, it's poor. It doesn't look like it's good quality. When you look at the walls, some of them have not been plastered. The plaster work doesn't seem to be good quality. I think the issues that the Auditor General raised are valid, that the workmanship is poor and that there are visible cracks on the walls.
2.5% is quite substantial, and that's why I'm saying people should be concerned about on how this money is being used. In this country, and now this is not just in the NG-CDF, in our public finance management, we have a very big problem in terms of procurement. That's where all the money disappears. Because when you're procuring something, there's that tendency of ballooning the budget. You claim that you have used 6 million, and in the real sense, you have used 1 million. But again, the other thing is these 2.5% of our national resources usually confuse our MPs and cloud their responsibilities as per the Constitution. But look at it this way. CDF fund is just 2.5% of our entire public resources. But MPs are supposed to oversight 100% of the fund. So if they get misled, or if they lose their focus because of this 2.5%, who will check the other 97.5%?
Citizens are given the chance to debate and identify priority projects to be funded by the NG-CDF. Projects like this bridge in the same constituency. Projects that voters in Laikipia East say have been abandoned. Projects which have sidelined them as voters. This, as mentioned before, is the first process.
I think ideally people or members of the constituency, the citizens in the constituencies, should be involved. In fact, not just involved, it is them who should identify projects, then forward them to the committee through a public participation process. Then the committee then forwards those projects to the national board of NG-CDF to approve the projects. But now in reality, people are not usually involved, and that's a problem even nationally, because our constitution requires people to be involved in governance, and unfortunately up to now the national parliament has not enacted a public participation law. We still don't have a public participation law.
Hii daraja ina connect eneo la Gishagi kuelekea na Nyuki Town. Sasa nadhani mnaona vile iko.
Mimi ningetaka kusema kwanza daraja. Hii daraja kusema kweli ni shida kwa watoto. Hii daraja inapitwa na watoto wadogo. Watoto hata wadogo kabisa. Unajua sasa akikota kututengeneza hii barabara, hii daraja hii yetu sasa hatafanya mzuri. Afadhali tu hiyo pesa amepata. Kwanza kitu ya kwanza daraja tutengenezee, na tutamwambia asante. Abila hata maji hapo. Hii daraja ukivuka hivi uko Meru pande hii. Ukivuka hivi uko wapi? Kwa Laikipia. Sisi ni watu wa Laikipia sana. Jua hata ID zetu zote ni pande gani? Pande hii ya huko Laikipia. Sasa hata huwezi jua ni nini, kwa sababu tukichagua watu hata wanatusahau. Hiyo daraja ilijengwa kitambo gani mpaka saa hii? Tunaona hata iko karibu kubomoka. Wao wakubwa wanafaa kutembea. Kwa kijiji wanafaa kutembea, si ndio? Wanakuja kujiangalilia vile mashinani kunakaa. Sisi hatuonani.
And even the MP, as the person who oversights everything, as the patron of the fund, should always come there and check whether the project is being implemented up to the standards which it should. Like where the people are not involved, they won't know, they don't even know the standards which should be followed. Now, in a situation whereby the MP wants to use those projects as a conduit to steal money from the people, he will be silent. He or she will be silent, they would speak. And that is the situation as we speak right now.
Wale tutaweka kwa hii, watapita hii nomination, tutawasukuma pia wapite kwa ile, waingie kwa serikali ndio watulete miradi ile ambayo tunataka.
let me remind you once more, this country is run by cartels. You won't be surprised if you find that the chairman of the NG-CDF committee in that constituency is related to the member of parliament. It won't be surprising that the architect, no, the contractor of that particular project is related to the chairman, related to the member of parliament. As in, it's not surprising that the entire team that was involved in that project has a relationship. And so it is a fellowship of goods.